She didn't bark. She didn't whimper. She just stood there, still as a statue, eyes locked on the fire station door, dragging a bloody child's shoe behind her. And somehow, they understood. This wasn't just a dog looking for help. This was a witness, a guardian, a soul God refused to let the world forget. And what followed was not just justice, it was a miracle. If you believe that even the silent ones are heard by heaven, watch till the end and comment, Amen. Because this is the story of a dog who remembered, so a little girl could be found. The snow hadn't stopped in 2 days. In the quiet town of Evergreen, Colorado, cradled between the thick arms of the Rocky Mountains, January often came with a harshness that bit through coats and silent streets. On this particular night, the wind howled like a restless ghost, chasing flakes in swirling patterns through alleyways and across the pine-lined road that led to Fire Station 6. The station stood like a forgotten outpost at the edge of the forest, its red brick walls dimly lit from within, windows frosted with breathy crystals of ice. Inside, most of the crew had gone off shift, save for two: Captain Madison Keller and firefighter Marcus Hayes. Madison Keller was the type of woman time had tempered like steel. In her early 40s, tall and lean with sharp cheekbones and deep-set green eyes, she carried the air of someone who had learned to lead not through noise, but through presence. Her graying hair was always tucked into a tight braid beneath her station cap, and the way she moved, deliberate, never wasting a step, gave the impression of precision forged by years of fieldwork. A decade ago, she had been a rising star in Denver's Central Command before the sudden disappearance of her younger sister, Jenny, shattered her center. That pain hadn't made her weaker. It had made her quieter, fiercer. She had transferred to Evergreen soon after and never looked back. Marcus Hayes, by contrast, was only a year into his position in Evergreen. 27, wiry but strong, with messy dark blonde hair and the kind of restless energy that filled a room. Marcus was still trying to learn when to charge and when to wait. He'd been demoted 6 months earlier after botching a house fire rescue. He had chosen to go after a trapped senior despite radio orders to retreat, only for the floor to collapse. He lived, the man didn't. Since then, he'd walked with an invisible weight he tried to cover up with humor and overpreparedness. It was just past 3:12 a.m. when the scratching began. Faint at first, rhythmic, desperate. Madison was halfway through her second cup of burnt station coffee when she glanced at the glass door near the equipment bay. There was movement, vague behind the frost. She rose quietly, her boots thudding softly across the concrete floor. "Marcus," she called. "We've got company." He looked up from the maintenance log, eyebrows raised. "What kind of company?" She didn't answer. She was already unlocking the door. The wind pushed in first, bitter and sharp, followed by the low whimper of something breathing hard. The smell came next, metallic, raw, blood. And then they saw him. A German shepherd stood on trembling legs just beyond the threshold, his coat soaked and matted with snow, mud, and dark streaks of red. His right paw was gashed open, bleeding freely onto the concrete. Clenched in his jaws was a worn white sneaker, stained thick with dried blood and slush. A pink stripe curved along the side. The laces were tied tightly in a double knot, and they weren't just wrapped through the eyelets of the shoe. They were looped, deliberately, around the dog's lower jaw, as if secured there by human hands. The dog's eyes met Madison's. Amber, wide, glassy but alert. He held her gaze for a moment longer than most strays ever would. Then, without fanfare, he dropped the shoe at her feet. Marcus let out a sharp breath. "What the hell?" Madison crouched slowly. "He's trying to tell us something. He's bleeding out. We'll call the vet. But first," she glanced down at the shoe, then at the dog. "We see where this goes." The dog barked once, short, clipped, almost impatient. Then, with effort, he turned and limped back toward the woods. "You want us to follow," Madison murmured. Marcus hesitated. "Cap, this is protocol violation on, like, 10 levels." "Then call it a hunch," she replied, already heading toward the truck. Shadow, though he was not yet called that, didn't look back. He limped onward through the snow-laden trail behind the firehouse, toward the forest. The storm had eased slightly, flakes falling now in lazy spirals, the wind retreating into muffled gusts. Madison turned the ignition of the rescue truck as Marcus slid into the passenger seat, both of them watching as the dog trotted ahead, as if he'd memorized the path. Who does that? Marcus muttered. A dog shows up bleeding with a murder shoe, and your first instinct is, let's go into the woods. He looked me in the eyes, Madison said. Not like a stray, like a soldier. They followed the dog past the old ranger station and onto a logging road long since swallowed by time. The woods here were tall and skeletal in winter, with blackened trunks from fires long gone and underbrush choked by snow. Madison drove slowly, tires crunching over frozen gravel. The dog paused occasionally, waiting for them, then pressing forward. They drove in silence, the only sound the low hum of the heater and the hiss of tires. And then, nearly 30 minutes later, the dog stopped completely. He stood at the edge of a clearing, small, ringed by trees, the center churned and disturbed, like something had been dragged. Madison killed the engine. Marcus stepped out first, flashlights sweeping across the space. Cap, over here. She joined him and immediately saw it. A small trail of red, smeared across the snow, leading from the center of the clearing into the shadows beyond. And lying near a moss-covered log, another shoe. Identical to the one the dog had brought. This one, however, was ripped open at the toe. A few feet away, something else, a pink scrunchie, soaked and half-frozen. The dog stood a few yards away, chest heaving, tail low. His ears were tilted slightly forward, waiting. I think he's trying to take us somewhere, Marcus whispered. Madison nodded, her voice low. He already has. The forest didn't speak. It never did. Not in words, not in sound. But as Madison Keller stepped further into the stillness behind the clearing, she felt it press in around her like an unspoken warning. Snow lay thick across the underbrush, but in the pale gray light of early dawn, it was clear where the path had been broken. Patches of red spotted the whiteness like forgotten ink blots, small but deliberate. The dog, wounded but determined, moved ahead without pause. His injured paw left faint smears in his wake, each one a signature. A message. Madison followed, her boots crunching behind him, while Marcus trailed a few steps behind, his flashlight slicing through the thinning fog. The wind had softened, but cold still clung to every breath. The air smelled of pine, old bark, and something faintly sour. Madison's eyes swept the shadows. He's leading us deeper, she said under her breath. He knows this place. Shadow didn't glance back. His tail was lowered but not tucked. There was no fear in his movement, only resolve. The trees grew denser as they moved forward, towering evergreens draped in snow like grave markers, each one leaning slightly toward the next, forming a corridor that narrowed with every step. Marcus cleared his throat. Cap, this is way outside our jurisdiction. Madison stopped, turned, and fixed her eyes on him. So was the shoe. Her voice was calm, but there was iron beneath it. He nodded reluctantly. Fair. They moved on. 20 minutes passed. The blood trail became more sporadic. Shadow had slowed, favoring his front leg. Madison paused and rummaged in her jacket, pulling out a cloth bandage from her emergency kit. She approached slowly. Hey, boy, she murmured. You've done enough walking on that paw. He looked at her, quiet, alert, and for a moment, she saw something in his gaze. Trust, maybe, or recognition. He allowed her to wrap his paw. She worked carefully, noting how the fur around his leg was matted and scarred, older wounds layered beneath new ones. This dog had not been a stray all his life. He had known people, maybe even loved them once. As she finished, her fingers brushed something cold hanging from his collar. A small, dented metal tag. She turned it over. No name. Just one word. Axel. Madison blinked. That's not your name now, she whispered. But it was, wasn't it? Shadow. Axel gave a faint exhale, then turned and began walking again, slowly but insistently. They followed. Another 10 minutes, and the woods opened slightly into a slope, the snow less thick beneath the canopy. That's where they found it. A hoodie, crumpled and half-frozen beneath a collapsed tree limb. The color had once been light blue, now dirted with soot and streaks of something darker. Madison crouched beside it, brushing snow from the fabric. There, stitched near the chest in faded pink thread, were 4 letters. Lily. Marcus crouched beside her, face tightening. That's the missing girl from Fairview. The Amber Alert went out 3 days ago. 8 years old. Brown hair, green eyes. Madison nodded. her throat tightening. It's hers. Marcus scanned the area. You think she made it this far alone? No, Madison said. She was brought. Shadow circled the hoodie, nose twitching, then stopped and growled low, not in warning, but in mourning. He pawed lightly at the dirt nearby, then sat, ears pinned back. Marcus stood and looked around. We should mark this location. Get search and rescue out here. This is officially a crime scene. Madison didn't answer immediately. She stood, eyes distant, scanning the trees. I remember a report, she said quietly. 4 winters ago, a crew logged a stray dog growling at the perimeter fence every night. Same week a teenage girl vanished during a snowstorm. They said it was coincidence, that the dog was just scrounging for food. You think it was this dog? I think he's been trying to speak for a long time. Her voice cracked slightly. We just didn't listen. They kept walking. Now every snapped branch, every odd indentation in the snow felt significant. Shadow seemed to remember them all. He moved like someone retracing a path burned into memory. When they reached a stream partially frozen over, Madison saw more signs. A torn wrapper, a mitten half buried in ice. Children's things, left behind or dropped. As they paused, a figure emerged from the trees on the other side of the stream. A woman, mid-50s, bundled in a thick navy parka, red scarf, and wool-lined boots. She had short gray blonde hair and sharp, intelligent eyes beneath thick brows. She carried a thermos and a laminated badge on a lanyard that read Forestry Service. Y'all are far from the station, she called, voice firm but not unfriendly. Madison stepped forward. Madison Keller, fire captain, Evergreen. This is Marcus Hayes. We're responding to a trail. The woman crossed the stream with surprising ease, boots finding each stone without hesitation. Up close, her face was lined but strong, with the kind of no-nonsense composure common in those who'd worked long years in remote terrain. Dana Cormack, she introduced herself. Been patrolling these woods 20 years. Saw your truck parked off Ridge Road. Figured something was wrong. She glanced at the dog. Friend of yours? Not exactly, Marcus said. He found us. Dana crouched to meet the dog's eyes. That's so, she murmured. Well, I'll be. Thought you looked familiar. You've seen him before? Madison asked. More than once. He used to show up near the maintenance cabins when the storms hit. Never let anyone get close. Always carried something in his mouth. Toys, fabric, once a pacifier. Dana stood. We thought he was just scavenging. But maybe, her words trailed off. Then, you following him now? We are, Madison said. Dana nodded. I won't get in the way. But if he takes you near the hollow past Dead Pine, be careful. That place it's old. Shadow moved again. They followed. And as they stepped beyond the stream and deeper into the narrowing pass between rock walls and leaning trees, Madison couldn't shake the thought forming in her mind. Maybe this dog hadn't failed anyone. Maybe he had just been waiting for the right people to follow. The sky was a dull steel gray when they reached the outskirts of the hollow Dana had warned them about. Snow had stopped falling, but the trees here were so tightly woven that light barely filtered through. The path narrowed into a shallow descent, flanked by jagged rocks and the remnants of old fire-blackened branches. Even the air felt different, heavier somehow, like it carried the weight of years. Shadow walked ahead of them, slower now, more cautious. His ears twitched at every rustle, and his body, though tired, remained taut with purpose. The further they moved into the hollow, the quieter everything became. No birdsong, no wind, just the soft sound of their boots sinking into the snow and the occasional low whine from the dog. Madison felt it before she saw it. A heaviness, a kind of pressure behind the eyes, as if her mind recognized something her conscious thoughts couldn't name. It wasn't just the place that was familiar, it was the feeling, a tension that coiled tight in the chest. She glanced at Marcus, who walked with his jaw set tight and flashlight sweeping in slow arcs. There, Shadow barked once, sharply, then veered left. Between 2 leaning trees stood an old shack. Its planks were weather-worn and gray, the roof half-caved, and the front door barely hanging on a single hinge. Ivy had once tried to climb it, but gave up long ago. One window remained, a cracked pane smeared with dirt and soot. It looked abandoned, but not forgotten. They approached slowly. Marcus pulled the door open, and it groaned in protest. The interior was stale and dark, the kind of darkness that felt layered, years of shadows stacked atop each other. Dust particles spun in the narrow beams of light cast from their flashlights. Inside was one room, small and claustrophobic, with a metal cot bolted to the far wall and a wooden crate serving as a makeshift table. It was Marcus who found the rope first, tucked beneath the cot, frayed and crusted at the ends. He held it up with gloved hands, expression unreadable. Madison moved to the crate. On top of it sat an empty box of powdered milk, long expired. Next to it, tucked between bent tin lids, was a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. A child's drawing, rough, colorful, and heartbreakingly innocent. A stick-figure dog beside a girl with long hair, both smiling beneath a yellow sun. She didn't speak, just passed it to Marcus. He studied it for a long second before folding it again. She was here. Shadow sniffed around the edges of the room, then stopped abruptly near the back wall. He scratched at the wood, growling low. Marcus knelt and ran his fingers along the boards. One section felt loose. He pried it away with his knife, revealing a narrow gap. Inside, a small leather object coated in dust. He reached in and pulled it free. A necklace. Delicate, tarnished silver with a circular pendant. Madison took it gently and turned the charm over. There was a name etched faintly into the back. Marcia. Her breath caught. This doesn't belong to Lily. Marcus looked up. Someone else. Before she could answer, Shadow began to bark. Loud, guttural, sharp. He backed away from the necklace, growling, hackles rising. Something's wrong, Madison said. They turned toward the door as Shadow darted out. Marcus and Madison followed, crunching through the snow just in time to see the dog circling a tree at the edge of the hollow, nose low to the ground. There, beside the roots, was a faded jacket, dark green canvas, old but well kept. On the inside collar, stitched in faded thread, were the initials. E.D. Marcus went still. E. Dempsey, he murmured. That's Earl Dempsey. Madison narrowed her eyes. You know him? I read his name in the department archives. He was a firefighter here. Quit suddenly after the Hollow Creek fire 10 years ago. No final statement. No transfer request. Just walked away. Madison remembered now. Dempsey had been on duty during the fire that had consumed over 300 acres and destroyed 6 homes. She hadn't been stationed here then, but she remembered reading about it during her first few weeks in Evergreen. A story that didn't add up. A man with a clean record just vanishing after a tragedy. Shadow growled again, this time at the jacket. He pressed his snout to the fabric, then pulled back sharply, teeth bared. Whatever happened here, Madison said slowly, he was part of it. They returned to the shack. Madison took pictures of everything. The rope, the drawing, the necklace. Marcus searched through a rusted cabinet near the back wall and found more, an old fire department badge tucked inside a shoe box, along with a series of yellowed photographs. One of them showed a group of firefighters posing near a rescue truck. Earl Dempsey stood on the far right, tall, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and thick brown hair under a cap. His eyes, even in the photo, seemed distant. But it was the photo beside it that made Marcus go still. It showed Dempsey and a woman, early 30s, shoulder-length dark hair, smiling faintly. Her arm was around a dog, a German shepherd with intense amber eyes. Marcus held it up. Cap, look familiar? Madison leaned closer. The dog. It was younger, fuller, but unmistakably Shadow. He belonged to her, she whispered. This Marcia. Marcus turned the photo over. A date was scribbled there, December 14th, 2015. Almost 10 years ago. Madison pocketed the photo. We're not just chasing one missing person, she said. We're chasing 2. Maybe more. Shadow walked to her side, pressing lightly against her leg. His body shook slightly, not from cold, but from something deeper. Something remembered. They stepped back outside. The wind had picked up again, ruffling the dead leaves and sweeping snow across their footprints. Madison looked toward the tree line, then back at the shack. There's more here, she murmured. Buried somewhere. And I think he knows where. Shadow stopped without warning, his body going rigid at the edge of a narrow path carved into the forest floor, half choked by creeping vines and snow-dusted underbrush. His nose tilted toward the air as if sniffing something just beyond human reach. Then, without a sound, he bolted. Madison and Marcus barely had time to exchange glances before chasing after him. The trail curved sharply, winding along the slope of a snow-covered ridge. Frosty branches scraped their jackets, and footing grew treacherous with each step. The sun was trying to pierce the clouds, but only a pale silver filtered through. Ahead, nestled against a wall of rock and partially obscured by dense trees, stood a squat, single-story house. It was made of raw timber, with a rusted metal chimney and a porch that sagged under the weight of packed snow. Smoke drifted faintly from the chimney, curling upward like a reluctant confession. Shadow halted at the edge of the tree lean and growled low, throat vibrating with unease. His ears flattened and his hackles stood up. Madison held up a hand, signaling Marcus to stay behind her. They approached cautiously. The front door opened before they reached the porch. The man who stepped out looked to be in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered with a thick beard gone mostly gray and piercing eyes the color of tarnished copper. His clothes were worn, layers of wool, flannel, and canvas that had seen too many seasons in the wilderness. His face was deeply lined, not from age alone, but from solitude and something darker, older. His hands, though large and weathered, held no weapon. But the way he stood, legs braced, jaw set, conveyed an unmistakable message. This was a man who trusted no one. "What the hell do you want?" he said, voice deep, rough as gravel. Madison didn't flinch. "Captain Madison Keller, Evergreen Fire Department. This is firefighter Marcus Hayes. We're following a lead in a missing child case. This dog brought us here." The man's eyes flicked to Shadow, who stood his ground with teeth bared. "And you figured I had something to do with it?" "We're not accusing you," Madison said carefully. "We're looking for someone named Lily. 8 years old. Went missing 3 days ago. I heard the alert," the man said, folding his arms. "But I haven't seen anyone." Marcus spoke next. "Are you Earl Dempsey?" The man's jaw clenched. "That name doesn't matter anymore." "It does to us," Madison said, stepping forward slightly. "You used to be a firefighter. This dog belonged to a woman named Marcia Caldwell. Her name was on a necklace we found in a shack not far from here. That's where the rope and drawing were. You remember that place." For the first time, Dempsey's eyes wavered. His posture changed, not quite softer, but less aggressive. "You should leave," he muttered. "This isn't your story." "Maybe not," Madison said, holding his gaze. "But it became ours the moment this dog limped into our station dragging a bloody shoe." Shadow growled again, deeper this time, eyes locked on Dempsey's hands. Marcus placed a steadying hand on the dog's back. "He knows you," he said quietly, "and not in a good way." Dempsey stepped back into the doorway. "You should go," he said again more quietly. "You don't want to dig into this." "We already have," Madison said. The door closed. They stood in silence, breath steaming in the cold. Marcus broke it. "We need a warrant." Madison nodded, eyes still on the door. "We'll get it. But in the meantime, I'll dig," Marcus said. They turned back, Shadow circling once before falling into step beside them. He looked over his shoulder as they left, ears still tilted back toward the house. By nightfall, Marcus was at the small operations desk tucked inside the corner of Station 6. While the rest of the team slept or cycled out on rotation, he dug into county archives. The computer was slow, the connection spotty, but he was relentless. Earl Dempsey, former firefighter. No arrests. No family. Left the department after the Hollow Creek fire in 2015 with no formal debrief. Last known address, an off-grid property purchased in cash 2 years prior. Rumors in internal memos, behavior changes, unexplained disappearances during shifts, possible connections to a missing person case. That case belonged to Marcia Caldwell. She had been a school counselor, 32 years old, last seen leaving her home on December 16, 2015, 2 days after the photo Marcus had found in the shack. Police questioned Dempsey, then her boyfriend, but the investigation went cold due to lack of evidence. No body, no signs of struggle, and no known connection, except that her dog had vanished too. The final piece came from an anonymous tip in a buried PDF. A neighbor claimed to have heard shouting near the woods, followed by barking that lasted for hours. Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes burning from the screen. He felt a sickness settle in his gut, not nausea, but rage. He printed everything. In her small office, Madison was staring at a map spread across the table. Lines drawn in pencil crisscrossed several trails through the woods, all centered around the ridge where the shack and Dempsey's cabin sat. Shadow lay nearby, head resting on his paws, but his eyes were open, watching the map like it was alive. She looked over at him. How long were you out there? She asked quietly. How many people did you try to show? He didn't answer, of course, but she imagined, for a moment, that if he could have, it would have broken her. Marcus entered with the folder. He's dirty, he said, and the connection to Marcia is strong. It's not just her, either. There are whispers about a second woman, Jenny Keller. Madison stiffened. My sister, she said. She disappeared in 2016. I didn't know there was any possible connection. You wouldn't have, Marcus said. The files were sealed. But she was last seen hiking in this area. Dempsey's name is scribbled in the corner of a ranger's handwritten note. Said he saw someone matching her description near Ridgewater Trail. Madison stared at the papers. He's been hiding something for a long time. And now, finally, someone was listening. The next morning arrived cold and hard, the kind of morning where every breath felt like glass in the lungs. The wind had changed directions overnight, and with it came a heavier scent in the air, something thick, sour, and unmistakably wrong. Shadow stood stiffly at the edge of a clearing behind the old logging road, his tail held low, nose to the wind. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. But he refused to move from the spot, paws planted just beyond a snow-covered rise in the earth that looked, at first glance, like any other forgotten hill. Madison squatted beside him, her fingers hovering just above the disturbed snow. Something's underneath, she said quietly. Marcus stood nearby, gripping a long-handled spade borrowed from the ranger station supply shed. His face was pale beneath his beard, but his hands were steady. We dig, he asked. Madison nodded. It didn't take long. Just beneath the frozen crust, the soil had been recently overturned, loose and damp, not yet reclaimed by the forest. And then, less than 3 feet down, came the first terrible truth, a scrap of fabric, deep red and speckled with mold. Beneath that, a glint of tarnished silver. Madison reached down with gloved fingers and brushed away the dirt until she saw the delicate chain. She pulled gently, revealing a small pendant, its face engraved in tight, careful script. Marcia. Her breath caught. Marcus crouched beside her. Is that? Madison didn't answer. She just nodded once, then stood up and took a long, slow step back. Shadow let out a whimper, not a cry of pain, but of recognition, of memory. He lay down beside the grave and placed his head on his front paws, eyes half closed, ears still alert. We need to call this in, Marcus said softly. Madison took a shaky breath. Yeah, do it. Marcus moved off to make the call, leaving her alone with the dog and the dead. She knelt once more beside Shadow, brushing snow from his fur. You stayed with her, she whispered. You never left, did you? Shadow didn't move. When the officers arrived 20 minutes later, led by Detective Gwen Halley from Jefferson County Homicide, the scene was cordoned off, and Madison stepped aside to let the professionals do their work. Gwen was in her late 40s, a compact woman with dark eyes and dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She wore a heavy down jacket and moved with quiet precision, rarely wasting a motion or a word. She'd once worked in Denver's Major Crimes Division before a shooting in 2018 left her with a shattered femur and a permanent limp. Rather than retire, she transferred to rural investigations. Less political, more honest. Gwen eyed the grave, then looked at Madison. Dog found her. Madison nodded. Led us straight here. And the necklace? I pulled it out, yeah? Didn't know what we were looking at until I saw the name. Gwen frowned and signaled to the forensic team. That name, Marcia Caldwell. That's the counselor who went missing a few years back, right? Suspected domestic? Earl Dempsey, Madison said. Gwen's mouth tightened. That bastard's name's been hanging around too many cold files. Never enough evidence. Well, now we've got a body. Yeah, Gwen said grimly. But he's slippery. And this? It's gonna have to be airtight. While the forensic team worked, Madison sat on the slope just beyond the crime scene tape. Marcus returned from the truck with a bottle of water and a thermal blanket. She waved him off. You should rest, he said. At least for a minute. I can't. You saw her necklace, he said gently. The same kind your sister wore? Madison nodded. Jenny had been 15. Bright, stubborn, curious. She used to wear a simple silver chain with a tiny horseshoe charm. Lucky, she'd called it. When she disappeared, they found her backpack by the river, but the necklace was never recovered. Madison hadn't thought of it in years. Not until she'd held Marcia's in her hands. I keep thinking about this dog, she said finally, glancing toward Shadow, who still lay by the shallow grave, unmoving. How long was he out here, guarding this? Waiting. 5 years, Marcus said. Give or take. That's longer than most people would stay loyal to anything. He nodded. You think he saw it happen? I think he tried to stop it. She stood slowly and walked over to the edge of the grave again. The scent had worsened now with the air disturbed, rotted earth, time, and the unmistakable signature of death. Gwen knelt over the remains, now carefully uncovered and bagged. She looked up. Body was wrapped in a blanket, she said. Partially decomposed, but it's definitely female. Dental records will confirm it, but I'm betting this is our girl. Marcus and I found something else yesterday, Madison said. A photo of Marcia and the dog. In a shack. East Ridge. Gwen raised an eyebrow. Shack. It had rope. Old food containers. A child's drawing. Gwen stood. You think he kept her there? I think it was a pattern, Madison said. I think Marcia wasn't the first. And Lily won't be the last if we don't stop him. Shadow stirred then. Slowly, he stood, wincing slightly at the bandaged paw, and limped toward Madison. She knelt beside him. You stayed, she whispered. All these years you stayed. Marcus watched silently. Then, turning his head away, he looked off into the trees, eyes narrowing. About 10 yards beyond the clearing, half hidden behind a tangle of thorn bushes, something caught the light. A piece of metal, maybe, or glass. He stepped over slowly and crouched. It was a lantern, battery-powered, the kind sold in outdoor supply stores. Still warm to the touch. Cap, he called out. Someone's been here recently. Gwen joined him quickly. Fresh. Within hours, Marcus said. Maybe less. Madison's face hardened. He's watching. Gwen nodded. Then we'll make him come to us. Snow had begun to fall again, fine and soft, dusting the peaks of evergreen like sugar over old bones. By the time the search warrant came through, dusk had settled and the wind carried a muted tension through the trees. Madison stood on the edge of the ridge, watching as officers from Jefferson County moved in quietly around Earl Dempsey's cabin. They worked with methodical precision, flashlights angled low, radios hushed. No one expected him to still be there, but Gwen Halley wasn't one for guessing. She was standing just behind the lead team, clipboard in hand, her face expressionless beneath a fur-lined hood. Her limp had grown worse after hours on uneven snow, but she didn't complain. Madison had come to recognize in Gwen the same quality she'd once seen in herself, someone too stubborn to yield even when the pain whispered otherwise. The door to the cabin gave little resistance. Inside, the air was stale with wood smoke and sweat, and the heat from a cast-iron stove made the room feel unnaturally warm after the chill outside. The place was simple, one room and a back storage area. But it was the walls that stopped everyone. Every surface, every plank, shelf, cabinet was covered in maps. Dozens of them, maybe more. Some new, others yellowed with age, each marked with hand-drawn circles and notations in a tight, blocky script. Marcus stepped forward, flashlight tracing along the ink. These are search grids. Madison joined him, frowning. Look at this, Lily's name. There it was, circled in red near a trail called Echo Pass, along with other names. Marcia, Jenny, Tara, Nina. Each one had a date next to it. The oldest dated back almost 15 years. Madison's breath caught as she found her sister's name. Jenny Keller. 2016. The handwriting was small and neat, methodical. This is a catalog, Gwen said from behind them. He's been keeping track. Shadow padded into the room, nose twitching. He moved past the stove toward the back wall, where a cabinet stood slightly ajar. He growled low, then pawed at it. Marcus opened it slowly. Inside, neatly stacked, were plastic containers filled with mementos. A locket, a hairbrush, a child's glove, a small rubber figurine. Evidence. Madison turned away, swallowing the rising bile in her throat. Just then, a voice crackled over Gwen's radio. Hallie, you copy? We've got a girl. Repeat. A girl was found on Ridgewater Trail. She's alive. Gwen froze. Say again. Civilian hikers reported her. Brown hair, green hoodie. Name's Lily. Paramedics are en route. She's cold, bruised, scared, but she's alive. The air shifted. Marcus let out a breath like he'd been holding it for hours. Madison's knees nearly gave, and she reached for the nearest support beam to steady herself. Shadow tilted his head, ears pricking forward. Where is she now? Madison asked. Staging point near the ranger station, Gwen replied. 5 minutes out. They didn't wait. Madison, Marcus, and Shadow piled into the department truck and drove back down the mountain road, headlights cutting through the flurries like spears of gold. When they arrived, an ambulance was already parked, lights spinning silently. 2 EMTs were working beside the rear door. Madison stepped out just as Lily was being lifted onto a stretcher. She was tiny, smaller than Madison remembered from the news photo, with tangled brown hair and pale skin mottled with bruises. Her eyes fluttered open as the wind hit her face, and she tried to speak but only rasped. A woman in her 30s with chestnut hair and a worried expression stood beside the paramedics. Emma Wilkes, the hiker who found Lily. She was tall and soft-spoken, a kindergarten teacher on winter break. She had spotted movement in the underbrush while hiking with her husband and followed the faint crying sound. She was lying beside a log, Emma explained shakily. Her hands were tied, but one was loose. She kept whispering about a dog. Madison moved closer. Lily, she asked gently. The little girl blinked again, then looked toward the truck. Shadow stepped out slowly, careful on the icy ground. Lily's eyes widened. That's him, she whispered. The black dog. Marcus stepped forward. What did he do, Lily? She swallowed hard. He found me. Pulled the rope off my wrist. I couldn't breathe. Then he licked my face and ran away. I thought he went to get help. Madison crouched beside her, tears stinging her eyes. He did. He brought us. Lily's hand reached toward Shadow, who lowered his head and pressed it gently against her fingers. Madison rose slowly, watching the two of them. He didn't fail Marcia, she whispered. And he didn't fail you. Marcus nodded. He's been trying to fix something for a long time. The ambulance pulled away with Lily wrapped in thick blankets, her mother now beside her, holding her hand tightly. The relief on the woman's face was indescribable, pure and broken and radiant. Madison stood with Shadow as the snow picked up again, light now, just enough to blur the outlines of the trees. You saved her, she murmured. All those years in the dark. You still believed someone would come. He didn't bark or whine. He simply leaned against her leg and let out a breath that steamed into the cold. Later that evening, back at Station 6, Madison found herself alone in the office. The maps from Dempsey's cabin had been photographed and cataloged. But one thing stuck with her. Some of the locations were still blank. No names, no dates. Just red X's. She opened her notebook and made a decision. We go back, she said to herself. We don't stop at Lily. Shadow lay nearby on a thick wool blanket. He lifted his head, and for a moment, Madison thought she saw something shift behind his amber eyes. Something calm, resolved. You're not done, she said. Neither am I. Morning had not yet broken fully when Madison stood near the edge of Deer Hollow Creek, where the water rushed in icy silence beneath a lattice of frost-covered branches. Fog hung low across the ravine, coiling like breath around the rocks. The cold stung her fingers even through her gloves, but she didn't move. Shadow stood beside her, eyes fixed ahead, tail still, body taut. Not like a hunter, but like a sentinel. The night before, Lily had whispered through cracked lips and chattering teeth. There was a door in the ground, behind the creek. He called it the cold room. That's where he put the bad ones. That phrase had settled in Madison's chest like a stone. The bad ones. Now, with Gwen Halley and a team of forensic officers scanning the area, Shadow stepped forward, nose to the frozen moss. He led them off the trail and down into a grove of cedar and spruce. It was there, tucked beneath a crumbling root system and hidden behind a camouflage tarp, that they found the entrance. It wasn't much, a square hatch, half buried and bolted shut with rusted chain. Madison knelt beside it, scraping away snow with her sleeve. Help me with this, she called. Marcus joined her, his face pale beneath his knit cap. He was sleep-deprived, unshaven, and tight-lipped, but the steadiness in his hands had not faltered. They pried the chain loose and pulled the hatch open with a groan of protesting hinges. The smell rose instantly, stale air, mold, earth, and something older, fouler. Gwen lit a high-powered lantern and lowered it through the opening. Wooden steps descended into darkness. Secure line, full mask, Gwen ordered. We're going in. Madison insisted on being first. She descended slowly, flashlight angled toward the ground, gun holstered but ready. Shadow followed without hesitation, his paws making soft clicks on the worn boards. The air grew colder the deeper they went, though the space was small. Only about 15 feet down into what looked like an old storm cellar, reinforced with concrete. The walls were lined with rusted shelving units. On them sat boxes, some labeled, some blank, and in the far corner, a writing desk, battered and stained, covered in stacks of worn notebooks and yellowing papers. Marcus and Gwen came in next, followed by a forensic tech named Reuben Clark, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses and a calm demeanor. Reuben had worked for the state crime lab for 20 years and spoke only when facts demanded it. Madison moved to the desk and picked up the first notebook. On the cover, Inventory 2010-2016. Inside were lists, each one dated and numbered, names, ages, and brief descriptions. Subject, Marcia C., non-compliant. Subject attempted escape. Penalty enforced. Dog removed from sight. Madison's voice was thin. Jesus, Marcus muttered. Another entry, dated 5 months later. Jenny K. lured near trailhead. Subject resisted. Notes, reminded me of M. Same eyes. Same questions. Madison felt her heart constrict. She reached for another box on the bottom shelf and opened it. Inside was a child's bracelet, faded pink with plastic stars, and a necklace with a broken chain, the charm missing. A small Ziploc bag contained 3 teeth. She staggered back. Marcus caught her. Don't, he said softly. Let me. Reuben moved forward silently and knelt beside the box. We'll get DNA confirmation, he said. But I can already tell. These weren't here by chance. Madison nodded, but she couldn't speak. She turned away, blinking hard. Shadow walked to the desk and sat beside it. He didn't sniff or scratch. He simply lowered his head, as if recognizing the room, its weight, and the things that had happened here. This is where he kept them, Gwen said, flipping through another page. This isn't just about hiding. He was studying them, cataloging them, like objects. There were more entries. Notes about other women, most unnamed, the nurse, the girl with the yellow coat, the talker. Always short, always clinical. But among the pages, one line stood out. Shadow has returned. Still watches from the trees. Remembers too much. If he leads them here, they'll see everything. Even he knew, Madison whispered. Back above ground, the sun had finally risen, casting pale light through the thinning fog. Officers sealed the site, bagged the evidence, and began the slow process of logging every object. Madison stood beside the hatch, arms crossed tightly, not for warmth but containment. He took her, she said to Marcus. He took Jenny. And I thought she ran away. I blamed myself. She didn't run, Marcus said. She fought. He wrote it himself. And she reminded him of Marcia. That's why he couldn't let her go. She was only 15, Madison said. She wore this stupid horseshoe necklace and thought she was invincible. She loved horror movies and chocolate milk, and her voice broke. Marcus stepped forward and wrapped an arm around her shoulder. She didn't resist. Shadow stood near the tree line, staring into the woods. He was trying to lead us here the whole time, Marcus said. Even back then. Madison wiped her eyes. I think he watched it happen. I think he was locked out when it did. And he's been trying to get someone to see ever since. They sat on the slope for a while, saying nothing. When the forensic truck pulled away, Shadow remained behind, still gazing into the trees. You're free now, Madison said to him softly. She knows we found her. Shadow turned slowly and walked toward her, pressing his head against her knee. The sun crept slowly over evergreen, warming the frost-bitten horizon with the softest gold, though the air remained sharp with the bite of winter. The last of the search teams had left the forest 2 days earlier, but Madison Keller still walked the trail behind Station 6 each morning, boots sinking slightly into old snow, her breath rising in quiet plumes. And always, Shadow walked beside her, his steps slower now, but purposeful. His dark coat had grown duller with age and time spent weathering the elements, but his eyes remained fierce with quiet knowing. He didn't bark, rarely reacted to other animals or passers-by, but when he stopped to look into the trees, Madison stopped too. Because she knew. He was remembering. Dempsey had been apprehended not 24 hours after they found the cold room. An anonymous tip, later suspected to be from Shadow's repeated returns to the ridge, had led officers to a cave system north of Whispering Bluff. He had tried to run but barely made it 10 yards before Gwen Halley, shotgun in hand, hobbled forward without hesitation and ordered him down. Earl Dempsey, the man who had haunted the woods for over a decade, was dragged from the forest he'd once ruled, eyes wild and speechless. They found a knife and a worn backpack on him, both containing evidence linking him to multiple abductions. Gwen didn't smile during the arrest. She didn't need to. At the hospital, Lily was healing slowly. Her small body had weathered more than most adults could bear, but her spirit, resilient, quiet, kind, remained unbroken. She had taken to drawing in silence, using thick crayons and white printer paper. On one page, she drew a black dog with amber eyes standing in front of a forest, its tail curled protectively around a girl in a green hoodie. At the top, she wrote in neat, blocky letters, "You remembered, so I could be found." She gave the picture to Madison the day she was discharged, and Madison pinned it above her desk in the firehouse, just below a photo of Ginny from her last birthday. Shadow had changed the town. Evergreen, once a place of whispered warnings and unsolved disappearances, now stood a little taller, a little prouder. Stories of the dog who never gave up made headlines far beyond the state. Local children left dog treats at the station gate, tucked into handmade boxes labeled for Shadow. Veterans sent medals. A senator wrote a letter. But Shadow didn't care for any of that. What he cared about was the silence of the trail at dawn, the scent of clean snow, and the feel of Madison's hand on his head. Madison herself had changed, though she couldn't quite describe how. Something inside her, long frozen by grief, had begun to thaw. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it reached her eyes. She still wore her uniform sharp and clean, still ran the station with precision, but she no longer closed her office door unless necessary. And every morning before the crew began their shifts, she poured a small bowl of warm water, placed it by the fire pit behind the station, and sat beside Shadow, just watching the forest. Marcus Hayes had been reinstated in full. The department quietly reversed his disciplinary record, citing extraordinary judgment under extraordinary circumstances. He didn't gloat. Instead, he spent more time with Shadow, learning his cues, walking the perimeter with him during patrols. He'd grown quieter, more grounded. Sometimes Madison would catch him sketching alone, trying to draw the shack from memory, or tracing maps with red pencil, connecting sites from Dempsey's past to unexplored corners of the forest. The guilt he once carried had been replaced with a mission: protect others, like they hadn't been able to protect Jenny or Marcia. 1 week after the official closure of the case, the town council held a ceremony. It wasn't large. Evergreen didn't do large things, but it was heartfelt. Near the edge of the forest, where the clearing once hid pain and now grew saplings, they unveiled a wooden archway hand-carved by local carpenter Ray Mickelson, a widower in his 60s with hands too rough for his age and eyes that had watched too many good people break. Ray had chiseled every curve himself, his knuckles raw from the cold. He had once lost a son to a drunk driver and never spoke much afterward, but when asked why he volunteered for the project, he simply said, "Because he waited. That dog waited." And that kind of loyalty deserves more than silence. The arch read, "Jenny and Marcia's Grove in Memory, in light." Beneath the arch, a simple trail wound through young trees and led to a bench facing east. And next to the bench, beneath a small roofed structure, sat a bronze plaque bearing Shadow's likeness. The inscription read, "Shadow, the one who remembered. For the lives you saved, the silence you broke, and the truth you carried." On the day of the dedication, Lily arrived with her parents. She wore a new green hoodie and gripped her mother's hand tightly, but when she saw Shadow resting near the bench, she ran ahead, knelt beside him, and wrapped her arms around his neck. He didn't move, just leaned into her and let her stay. After the crowd dispersed, Madison and Marcus stayed behind. The snow had begun again, light and slow, turning the ground pale. "She saved that drawing," Marcus said, nodding toward Lily. "Still keeps it in her backpack." Madison nodded. He was her hero. He was everyone's. Shadow rose and walked a few steps forward, stopping near the edge of the trees. He stood there, unmoving, like he had so many times before, watching. You think he's still waiting for something? Marcus asked. Madison shook her head. No, I think he's guarding it now. Not out of pain, out of peace. She stepped forward, stood beside him, and for a long while, neither moved. The wind stirred the pines gently. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried once into the stillness. The forest, once a place of secrets and sorrow, now stood quiet, not with fear, but with reverence. There are stories that don't need loud words. There are heroes who don't wear badges, don't need guns, don't need applause. Shadow is one of them, a seemingly forgotten dog, but he still persistently guards a truth that the world once refused to see. He didn't give up, didn't turn away, didn't stop hoping. And it was from that silence that miracles happened. When people gave up, God didn't give up. When everything seemed too late, he was still quietly working. Somehow, through the darkness, through the cold snow, through Shadow's bloody footprints, God used a small creature to awaken an entire community. Maybe miracles don't always come in bright lights. Sometimes, they come in a quiet bark in the night, or in the eyes of a dog looking straight into the pain that people tried to forget. This story is not only a reminder of loyalty, courage, or justice, but also a testament to the fact that miracles always begin when we start listening, start believing, and start taking action, even if it's just a small step. And if you're feeling forgotten, carrying a silent pain in your heart, remember, God sees you. He's still working, even when you can't see it. If this story touches your heart, leave an amen in the comments as a prayer for the lost souls, and for the shadows out there who are still standing guard for what's right. Don't forget to share this video to spread the message of love and faith. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on inspiring stories of loyalty, sacrifice, and miracles from seemingly small things. And above all, may God be with you always in the darkness, in the light, in the memories you carry, and the miracles that are near.